Good afternoon. I always kick myself when I realise I've yet again accepted an invitation to speak after Alistair Burns at a conference like this. But after seeing that very incredibly moving film, which just highlights quite why we're all here and why we're trying to do what we want to do, I hope that my talk can at least live up to close to that high watermark. My name's Matt Norton. I'm Director of Policy, as Angela said, for Alzheimer's Research UK. It's been great to be here this morning, hear the passion, commitment, and actually the frisson of anger that exists in this room around how we really drive improvements in care and support for people with dementia at the moment. I'm today going to try and add the sort of another piece of that jigsaw puzzle to this discussion. And unfortunately, at the moment, it's a future piece of the jigsaw puzzle, but around where we are with the elusive new treatment that Angela and Charles were talking about earlier in their discussion, and try and give you an update on progress. Alzheimer's Research UK is a charity that is focused on funding research into cause, treatments and cure, ultimately, and hopefully preventative cure of dementia. That's our focus, and that's where we place our efforts and research funding, and we do that through public donations. I'm going to start and try and litter the presentation with some interactive questioning, so if you can all take your remotes out of your chairs. I'll start with a question that, again, I think resonates with early discussions and the very passionate plea Angela made around the need to recognise this condition as a disease and actually start shaping public opinion and confronting misconceptions. So when we interviewed the public just prior to Christmas, how many people do you think correctly identified dementia as being caused by brain disease or degeneration? And there were have the results, and actually very perceptive of you. Yes, 25%, or I think it was more like 23% of people identified dementia as being caused by some form of disease or diseases, with 46% of people saying that was a result of memory loss. And of course, that speaks exactly to the point Angela and Alistair were making earlier around the need for government, for the Department of Health, for us all to start thinking about how we confront those misconceptions as part of a much broader awareness raising and programme to combat the stigma of dementia, bring it out of the shadows and allow people like the people Angela mentioned and who we hear about a lot in our charity, who aren't prepared to talk about the disease because they're scared of the implications of doing that. And one thing that we do try and do in our work, alongside supporting the research, is to try and really confront those misconceptions and change that public perception. And we want to see a real shift in that understanding. But where are we with treatments? Well, as Alistair's mentioned already this morning, I have to start with more failure and more disappointment, I'm afraid. Some of you may remember that back in November, the Lilly drug solanezumab failed. This was a big disappointment because actually there was quite a lot of hope for this drug, because pooled data from earlier trials had shown that this drug had quite considerable potential, we thought. Now, when they did the trial, and the big phase 3 trial focusing just on the patient population with mild symptoms of dementia and of Alzheimer's disease, unfortunately it showed no significant impact on slowing the condition. So another hope was dashed. And on that basis, and compared to other disease areas, what do you think the success rate is of the average number of preclinical, so early stage candidates that are needed to get one drug approved? It's 14.8 on average across disease areas. How many candidates do you think are needed for Alzheimer's disease? Yeah, and again, quite right. It's well over 100. The success rate is 119.3 candidates with a success rate, again, as Alistair I think mentioned this morning, of less than 0.5%. So it's a really challenging area in terms of developing new treatments. And of course, that's why we haven't had any new treatments for over 15 years, and why, unfortunately, we have nothing that can slow or halt the progress of Alzheimer's disease and, of course, the other diseases that cause dementia. So why is that? What's different about dementia drug discovery? Well, the chart that you see on the slide here, this is, again, a long and risky road to the average process of drug discovery. And we can see the length of time that it takes to develop a new drug, the numbers of candidates that you need, or compounds that you need to look at and screen before you can find the few that have potential to be turned into a new treatment, and the testing that they need to go through to take them up to the point where you can actually start testing them in people and in clinical trials. That can take up to 6 years, sometimes even longer. And then, of course, when you take them into clinical trials, you need huge sums of money, and you need a huge number of volunteers and a huge amount of time to test that drug and to run it through all of the different phases of clinical development, and really get to a point where you have a successful drug that is shown to be effective in the population you're targeting. And then after that, you then have to go through the marketing approval and licensing approval to actually get the drug ready to be given to patients. And then after that, you then have to navigate the system to get that drug to patients. So, of course, that all takes a huge amount of time, and it takes a huge amount of money, hundreds of millions of pounds. Now, with dementia, it's an even longer and riskier road. And that's for a multitude of reasons. First of all, we have a very limited understanding, or a relatively limited understanding, of the disease mechanisms that cause dementia. And so, of course, that makes generating the compounds that we need to test and need to work through in order to get to the potential treatments a lot more difficult, and there are a lot fewer of those. And then, therefore, there are fewer also within the preclinical phase of development. And then once we get into the clinical trial phase, unfortunately, the trials tend to be longer and much more expensive in dementia, in the recent ones in Alzheimer's disease. And that's, for a number of reasons. But we certainly see, because of a slow and uneven progression of the disease, we need relatively longer trials in order to detect what is often a reasonably small change in the rate of decline of somebody with Alzheimer's disease or other dementias. And we also, unfortunately, have some very, at the moment, quite blunt clinical endpoints, which that means you need then a large sample size to manage the variability and the lack of accuracy of those endpoints. And those things lead, of course, to then that longer and more expensive trial. And I think what we've seen from a lot of the recent failure in this space, the recent drugs that have targeted amyloid, is that they probably haven't worked. I mean, a number of reasons why they may not have worked, but actually one of the key ones is probably because they haven't been given to people early enough. And of course, if we don't have the ways of diagnosing and detecting people early enough, then it's very difficult to give the treatment at the right time and hopefully slow down the condition. So the need to shift, ultimately, at the moment, the focus needs to be on research, but again, ultimately into the clinical setting, shift towards earlier diagnosis and detection, ultimately, hopefully before symptoms even start to show in people, is crucially important. And so the development of diagnostic tools and things like biomarkers and new imaging tools become crucially important for research and for ultimately getting treatments as early as possible to people with dementia to try and slow or even ultimately halt the condition even occurring and the symptoms even coming to fruition in people. And that is, again, a very quick overview of some of the key reasons why we haven't seen any new drugs for over 15 years in dementia. So what can we do about that? What are the highest priority requirements? Well, we need to improve understanding of disease processes in neurodegeneration. The brain is possibly and probably one of the most complex organism that exists in the known universe, with the hundreds of billions of brain cells that we all have. Understanding and unpicking that organ is incredibly complex and difficult. By improving understanding, we then need to develop and increase the number of validated targets in areas the disease processes that we can hit in the brain to try and slow and halt the condition. And we need to encourage reinvestment into the area. So, understandably, to an extent, because of the huge numbers of failures and the very expensive failure, it's been an area in which the pharmaceutical industry have at least historically scaled back their investment in, because where would you put your money if you're seeing huge amounts of failure in dementia treatment, but you're having quite a lot of success in, say, oncology? Inevitably, in a market decision, you're going to put your money into oncology. So how do we continue to encourage and increase future investment from the pharmaceutical industry? And indeed, that's beginning to come back. And I think many companies would now have strong programs in this area. But again, a lot more that we can do. But there is hope. And this is, I don't expect to see any of the detail on this slide, but this is a slide of the clinical compounds that we currently have in development for Alzheimer's disease. It's slightly out of date now, but it shows that there are a number of promising treatments, and again, ones that we can hold hope for. So Biogen have a new treatment in phase 3 that will read out, and we'll see results in the next 2 or 3 years. MSD, Merck have a BACE inhibitor, have another treatment that again will read out over in the coming years and over the next 5 years. Roche have a compound. So there is still hope, and over the next few years we can be hopeful that one or more of those treatments will prove to be successful and will prove to be the first treatment that can actually do something to slow down the condition. But of course, when you compare that to other areas, we're still nowhere near the scale of potential candidates coming through the system. So again, another question. Between October 2014 and February 2015, there were 295 drugs in phase 1 to 3 trials of all therapy areas. How many do you think there were for dementia? Yeah, so vast majority you think 10. I don't think it's not quite that bad. 64, but just 2% compared to 28%, say, in cancer. And that was the whole of dementia, not just Alzheimer's disease. So again, we're unfortunately starting from quite a low base here in terms of the pipeline and potential for new treatments. So what can we do about that? And crucially, how can the UK lead the way? Well, I think to start with, this is an area where certainly the current government can be given a reasonable and significant amount of credit to their response in terms of particularly the research aspect of the Prime Minister's challenge on dementia. We've seen a significant amount of increases in funding from government, and also their work to stimulate funding and investment from other sectors. So the Dementia Discovery Fund is a good example of that, where 6 pharmaceutical companies, the government, as well as Alzheimer's Research UK, have invested over $100 million in an investment fund to target promising, quite early stage drug discovery work to try and feed that pipeline I've just talked about and really improve the numbers of candidates going into clinical trials. They doubled their funding between 2012 and 2015. They're proposing to do that again by 2025, but in fact, we're seeing already that the amount of money going from government to dementia research is increasing beyond that. And that's not least, or that's not at least a result of the National Dementia Research Institute, which has recently been established, and which I'll talk about in a second. But also government showing considerable global leadership in terms of the World Dementia Council, setting up the World Dementia Council and a global action on dementia to try and move forward not just research but awareness of dementia and how we also deliver improvements in care and support. But significant progress made in the research sector. But it has to be pointed out that that's starting from a very low base. So 5 and certainly 10 years ago, the amount of investment funding, certainly from the public sector and from charities, was very, very small. Now that's increasing dramatically, but we're still only at the foothills. We're still only creating the foundations that we need to really start making significant progress in this space and really feeding the pipeline for new treatments. Now, I will specifically mention the Dementia Research Institute because this is an exciting new initiative. So for those of you who don't know, something that came directly from the Prime Minister's Dementia Challenge. It's a 3-way partnership between the Medical Research Council here in the UK, ourselves at Alzheimer's Research UK and the Alzheimer's Society. And we're investing £250 million between us into this research institute. And this will be a world-leading institute focused on our understanding of the diseases that cause dementia. And that's crucial because our understanding then creates the underpinning for translating that understanding to target the development of new treatments. That will start in earnest next year, we hope, in terms of the science, and there'll be a brand new building, hopefully by 2022, in London, in Queen's Square at the University College London. And all of this has meant that we have seen progress. So numbers of dementia researchers between 2008 and 2009 and 2014, 2015 has almost doubled from just over 3,000 to just over 6,000. In line with that, the number of UK dementia publications has almost doubled from over 1,500 to over 3,000. And crucially, and really incredibly crucially in the dementia research space, we're also seeing a growth in collaboration. Collaboration, given the thorniness and the difficulties that exist in our understanding of the condition and making progress in dementia and biomedical research in dementia, bringing together new ideas, people from different fields and getting people to share data and collaborate is crucially important. So we've also seen an increase in number of collaborations. But, and as I've said, we're still really at the beginning of that journey. Significant progress has been made, but when we start comparing to other disease areas, how far do you think that we are behind? And I've already given you the answer to this, haven't I? So the eagle-eyed amongst you will realise that the answer has already been given to this. I put these questions in earlier and should have done it the other way around. So I expect to see 100% for the answer to this question. Oh, some of you clearly aren't listening to me. There we are. As I've already said, over 6,000 dementia researchers, just over 6,000, which is a significant increase, but obviously pales into significance compared to cancer research. So we've got a lot of work to do, but the signs and the growth is incredibly encouraging. Now, as I mentioned, industry clearly has a role in this. And we are seeing, I think, increased investment across the pharmaceutical industry and an increased desire to come back into the dementia research space. Of course, when we see the first treatment, the first successful treatment that can slow or halt this condition, the likelihood is that that opens the floodgates and many more interested parties come on board because they see the potential. And actually, we've broken that dam. We've created that first positive treatment that then, as we've seen in other disease areas like cancer and heart disease, hopefully opens the floodgates. But we are seeing growth in investment. We're also seeing, and again, some creative ways of not just channeling investment into R&D directly and solely to the problem from pharmaceutical industry, but how do we think about collaboration? How do we create public-private partnerships that can really move things forward? EPAD, down in the bottom corner there, is a very good example of that. This is European Prevention of Alzheimer's Disease, Dementia Consortium, focused on looking at how we can potentially prevent Alzheimer's disease and other dementias, both through risk reduction and lifestyle factors, but also through early therapeutic intervention. And is also helping to develop a trial-ready cohort, so people who are people with dementia who are well characterised, who we can then use or who can then be very quickly used and recruited into clinical trials. One of the big problems that I didn't mention earlier around clinical trials is that the screen failure rate, should I say. So in the Lilly trial that I mentioned earlier, in the failed Lilly trial, it was something like 70 or 80% of people who were originally recruited to that trial were screened out and weren't suitable to take part because of problems of diagnosis and actually did they have the hallmarks of the disease in the brain that this treatment was looking to target. And that, of course, makes things incredibly expensive. So initiatives like EPAD are really hoping to and trying to change that and speed up efficiency and therefore cost of the dementia, of trials in the dementia space. I think risk sharing is also incredibly important. I've already mentioned the Dementia Discovery Fund, this investment fund where the pharmaceutical industry and pharma partners are investing and sharing risk across their investments there. We originated the Dementia Consortium at Alzheimer's Research UK, which is us as a charity working and funding in conjunction with the pharmaceutical industry at really quite early, risky stage potential drug discovery projects. And projects that without our investment and without working alongside ourselves in the MRCT, industry wouldn't have invested in. So again, trying to really kickstart the field and drive the number of candidates in clinical, in preclinical and then clinical development. And also we need to, and probably is more so than in maybe in any other disease area, we need to really think about how we share the data across all of the research that we do. And for the pharmaceutical industry, sharing and being transparent about the data that comes out of their clinical trials is incredibly important. We were very pleased to be able to host a meeting of some of the world leading academic researchers in this space, where Lilly presented the data from the solanezumab trial, and really with an aim of increasing learning across the field and improving the potential and the development of the next clinical trial and the next set of research in this area. So transparency and data sharing incredibly important. What are we doing as an organisation? What is Alzheimer's Research UK doing? Well, we've seen a significant increase in our funding over recent years, and particularly over the last 5 years. And that's no coincidence, I think, as we see dementia rising up not only the political agenda, but the public agenda. And we've really tried to invest that in the most efficient and strategic ways possible to really focus on how we generate benefit for patients as quickly as possible by finding new treatments. And these are some of the key ways that we've been doing that. So I've mentioned already the risk sharing with the pharmaceutical industry particularly, and how we stimulate further investment in potentially risky but also potentially very innovative new projects in this space. We've also looked at how we can do industry standard or pharmaceutical standard drug discovery, but utilise our world-leading academic institutions that we have in the UK. So our Drug Discovery Alliance is made up of Universities of Oxford, Cambridge and of UCL. And they're saying, can an academic-led model of drug discovery, can that complement what the pharmaceutical industry is doing? And is that a new and innovative way of potentially finding the next new and hopefully effective dementia drug? And also, I've mentioned the Dementia Discovery Fund, but trying to really encourage more strategic and growth of investment from across the space, from the pharmaceutical industry, yes, but also potentially from the financial sector, to increase our investment in research. Because government and charities aren't going to do it on their own. We need the pharmaceutical industry, and we also need private investment to invest those hundreds of millions of pounds that we need in this space. I just wanted to highlight to you our new Dementia Statistics Hub. So hopefully this can be a useful resource for many of you in the audience. But what we've tried to do here is compile all of the key statistics around dementia. So not just dementia research, although that's a focus, but what are all the key best available evidence and statistics around dementia, and how can and we've put them in a very accessible and open place on our Dementia Statistics website. So I'd urge you all to go and have a brief, or indeed an even longer look at these pages, because hopefully it can really give you some useful information moving forward around the key statistics of dementia. In all of our in the development of our research and our research strategy, of course, where appropriate, we work with people with dementia and our supporters in terms of structuring what we do as a charity and the research that we fund. But I wanted to highlight, and the stand is out in the foyer today, and I would urge as many of you as possible to go and speak to Join Dementia Research. I wanted to highlight Join Dementia Research. And it's one thing to be increasing investment and be increasing funding in dementia research, but if the people with dementia aren't able to access the research studies to which that funding is going into, then the research takes a long time to do, or even in some cases can't be done. And people with dementia aren't benefiting from the benefits that can come from being part of research. So Join Dementia Research is really about bringing people with dementia, creating a database of those people and giving them the opportunity, giving them the opportunity to take part in suitable research studies, and making the link between the research community and those people with dementia. And again, accelerating the numbers of people who can take part in research. Many of the clinical trials are now finding their way on to Join Dementia Research, so people who sign up as well have an opportunity to potentially take part in the next new clinical trial. And of course, we know the benefits of being involved in clinical trials can be great, and in terms of the care and support that people participating in those trials get, that can be greatly increased. So there are a lot of good reasons to take part in clinical trials. We have over 6,000 volunteers in Join Dementia Research. I think that number is even higher now, and we've seen over 95 studies recruited through Join Dementia Research. We want to continue to increase those numbers, and particularly increase those numbers in terms of the people with dementia who are part of Join Dementia Research. And that's going to take a coordinated effort across the health system, from GPs, from memory clinics, and also charities like ourselves and Alzheimer's Society and Alzheimer's Scotland, in terms of raising awareness and really putting Join Dementia Research on the map. And again, each of you in your own work can hopefully help to raise awareness of Join Dementia Research. And finally, I just wanted to say a little bit about what we need to do if we're putting all this investment into research into new treatments for dementia. How do we prepare the system for those treatments today? So how many people do you think could be eligible for a new Alzheimer's disease treatment if it was approved? Yes, again, very good. I think most of you got that right. 43% of you got that right. There were approximately 260,000 people estimated to have Alzheimer's disease in 2015. Now, it's unlikely that certainly the first few treatments would be available to all of those patients, and indeed would be targeted to all of those patients. But it does give an idea of the scale of numbers of people who might in the future be eligible for treatment. So that number will continue to grow. And while we're thinking about how we're improving, and the crucial questions about how we're improving care and support in the system as it exists to support people with dementia today, which of course is so important, what we are saying through our report Treatments of Tomorrow is that we also need to be thinking about how now we start thinking about the system being ready for new treatments. Because it's not a given that if a treatment is approved and shown to be effective, that it will get to patients. There are challenges in the system itself, so the working relationships between general practitioners, between memory clinics, between neurologists, and how that might work should a new treatment be shown to be effective. We need to look across that system and look at some of those challenges. Affordability clearly is going to be a big challenge. These drugs are likely to be quite expensive. We now have a £20 million cap from NHS England in terms of triggering a review of a decision to fund medicines. I think it's more than likely that a future dementia drug would get us to that cap. So how do we start thinking about those affordability challenges now and start preparing for ways to overcome those challenges and innovative new solutions to do that? And again, as part of the system challenges, how can we, and we've seen some great progress made in training for people within the health system, but how do we adopt innovation quickly in innovative new dementia treatments, and how do we embed that across the system? And these are all things that I would urge need to be considered now, so that we're prepared when the time does come and that patients aren't left waiting for new treatments or the new treatments that become available. And I will leave it there in the interest of time. Thank you.